We are transitioning. We are all transitioning into the next paradigm. An entirely new paradigm of thinking, of consciousness, of technology and how we understand technology, of cosmic relationships renewed in some cases, in other cases established for the first time. We're moving into an era that will either be very much like what our concept of hell is, or it will be literally heaven on earth. So we're coming to a time of crossroads where those who are prepared to move into the next paradigm of heightened awareness of God consciousness, of ascended thinking, ascended being, and supreme understandings of the universe and of the creation, as we call it. Those who are prepared for that will transition and essentially transmutate, which is the correct term to use for this, will transmutate into an entirely new being, an entirely new human. And that's what we're really talking about, the human. But those who are unprepared, who during this time, because this is a crucial time, this is the time right before the transition and also is the time in which the transition is beginning. And those who are walking around with their eyes super glued shut, their ears stapled closed, their awareness fully dumbed down, their consciousness on the level of an animal, these particular individuals, which is 99% of everybody alive, unfortunately, but these individuals are going to suffer. Some are going to have to be wiped out. This is the way the universe works. Then when it's time for the new, all of the old that cannot transition has to be eliminated. And so the universe will do this. And many will be lost as a result of that if they're not prepared. And some of those who are not prepared may meet an even worse fate by being duped or tricked or recruited, whatever kind of word you want to use, by basically the Defiler. When we talk about the Defiler, we're talking about the enemy of ascension, evolution, godliness, supreme consciousness, creatorhood, the enemy of these things. And there is an enemy. This is a war. It's in some ways a very subtle war, but yet truly it is a cosmic war, and it is of the utmost seriousness and of the utmost importance. So there is a war. There are two factions at the very least, if not more, but there are always two factions in spiritual wars, and there are two factions in this one. And those who are not prepared for this ascension are those who unknowingly have aligned themselves with the faction who is essentially a defiler of divinity, a defiler of true human nature, not the nature that they've given us to believe is human, but the true human nature, which is actually the same as God nature, because the human was always intended to be a godly being, to be a spiritual being on a physical plane. So this is a crucial time for both those who are what I would call lost souls. Who are these lost? Who are these ones who have been tricked into lifestyles, mindsets, and low animalistic levels of consciousness that have caused them to be almost completely cut off, if not entirely cut off from anything spiritual or anything ascended. So a crucial time for them. It's also a crucial time for anyone who is in any way looking for something more, who knows there's something more out there, but can't figure out, can't quite find it or can't quite find themselves. So there are those who are looking, but they're not necessarily, they don't know where to look. They don't know how to look. And the problem is they're looking and not realizing that if they would stop looking, they would find that they are the solution to their own problem. So you have these people. Then you have this 1% that we talk about. And the 1% are those who are awake, who are fully awake and know what's going on, who they are, what our position in the cosmic drama, as some people call it, or the cosmic spiritual war, who our enemies are, or rather our enemy, because it really truly is one enemy, not many. It's one enemy in many forms. And who our allies are, and who understand some of the sacred science of the ancestors and of the ancients. We're talking about Kemet, Sumer, the Hindu, Aztec, Mayan, Babylonian, Ethiopian. I can go on and on. All of your ancient civilizations. The Moors and all of that stuff. These ancestors, their civilizations, their so-called mythology was truly ancient science. It was spiritual science. And essentially, when we talk about that, we're really just talking about alchemy, because all of these ancient sciences stem from alchemy. Alchemy is the ultimate science. It is the quintessential science. It is that which is entirely spiritual and yet entirely scientific at the same time. The study of spirituality, of the spiritual laws, the spiritual elements, the cosmos, the zodiacal forces that rule over the universe, the spiritual personalities of the creator, of the great four suns and all of that stuff. All that information is all in the writings of the ancients. If you go to any ancient civilization, at some point they were talking about it, because they were closer enough to the original practitioners of alchemy, which in a lot of cases they were living with. Some of these people actually were initiated into different mystery systems, which were alchemist priest systems. So they were closer to the information, and so a lot of the information ended up weaving throughout their mythology, throughout their folklore, throughout their legends. A lot of these things, a lot of this information was there. So there are some people who understand this and who study the ancient mythologies, the ancient, which really mythology is not the right word for it, but anyway, it's probably a more accurate word than any other one I can come up with at the moment. But yeah, there are those who study the ancient spiritual sciences, the ancient different versions and divisions of alchemy, which is what this is all about, really, is alchemy. If one understood alchemy, they would achieve their godhood probably in half the time of a normal person. In fact, it may only take them a couple of decades if one could truly understand and practice everything that's contained in the craft and science of alchemy, because that's how powerful that is. That's what alchemy is about. It's about the transmutation of the physical beingness, physical matter, into the spiritual, the true ascended spiritual substance, which is the substance of the original creator. And obviously that's the substance that created the creation. And the creation is, when we say that, we're not talking about the universe. We're talking about the four universes. And we're talking about the four universal suns that these universes revolve around. Even though some say there's 5 universes because of the source realm. So that's what we're dealing with. And anybody who's on that level, who's studying and understanding those things, and who knows what I just said without me having to explain too much, because I haven't really, explained it. Those who know what I'm talking about. But the idea is that there's a book that will be coming out that I'll be working on, I'll be writing, and I'm going to explain all of these things, so as much of it as I can explain in a book, which really is only a fraction of it, but yet will seem to be worlds of information. But yeah, I want to explain it because this is a crucial time. We have these different people that are falling in these different categories of consciousness and different levels of understanding of the cosmic drama and the cosmic war and the different aspects of the self, and a lot of people are searching for something more, and they're searching for guidance. They want to know, maybe not necessarily the truth, because once you become truly ascendant in your thinking, even on the human level, you realize that no one is searching for truth, even if they think that they are, because there is no absolute truth. There is only elements of truth, or there is a big picture truth. But within that truth, there are a million variations of facts, which cannot really be categorized as true, because sometimes they may change under certain circumstances, and there's so many different energies and different forces that have an influence on what the so-called truth is at any given time. That you're not dealing with truth, you're dealing with laws more so than anything else. You're dealing with universal laws. You're dealing with understanding the universal balance and how it works, how to work with it, how to make it work for you. And that's really what ultimately most people will end up discovering. But there is no true truth, because truth changes. What's true in the physical is not true in the spiritual. And the spiritual is not one place. There are different levels of spirituality. There are different realms, different dimensions of spirituality. And in essence, the word spirituality means absolutely nothing, because we're not really, talking about just spirits. I mean, yeah, there are spirits, but that's not what we're talking about. When we say spirituality, it's got nothing to do with your house being haunted or anything like that. It's not about that. It's about a lot more than that. We're talking about vibrational frequencies. Rate of vibration is what we're talking about. We're talking about slow vibrations versus high vibrations. And we're talking about the different beings and the different levels of God consciousness, which is the awareness of self as a minute aspect of the original creator. When you can be aware of yourself as a minute personality of the original creator, and at the same time be aware that you yourself are the original creator, are the representative of the original creator. When you can be aware of both things, now you're dealing with God consciousness, which is way beyond anything human. So at that point, you are not human, you are a God. But that has to do with vibration, has to do with raising your vibrational frequency to a point where you're vibrating so fast, or your atoms, your every particle of your being. When we say atom, we know there's smaller parts than the atom, but still, it's a good example to use the atom. When your atoms are vibrating to the point where they literally cease to vibrate and become still, to vibrate so fast that they almost freeze. And when they freeze, they freeze into an absolute state of complete perfection. And at that point, because they're no longer vibrating slow, or they're not fluctuating, they're stable, but at the same time, they're so fast that they're fast and still at the same time. This absolute state, which is difficult to explain, which is why the book goes into a lot more depth and detail over the course of chapters. And right now, I'm just trying to summarize it. But that's basically what we're dealing with. When you vibrate on that level, you will literally crystallize, not crystal as in physically your skin turns into crystal. We're not talking, it's not like Twilight. We're not talking about, that kind of crystal skin thing. It's not about that. But what we're talking about when we say crystallize is that you will solidify in a perfect state and be in that state immortal at that point. And that's the highest rate of vibration that we're trying to get to. Right now, we're vibrating on such a low frequency that we're decaying, we're aging, we're getting sick. All of these things are symptoms of low vibrational frequency. And of course, you can vibrate even lower than where you are, and that's how you have, as you start to not take care of your diet, and not take care of your mind, not take care of your different emotional states, and not take care of your spirituality, what'll happen is you'll get sicker. Your skin will, get flaky. You'll get, all these different disorders and diseases and all these types of things start to happen more and more. You start to be more susceptible to them, and they start to take a hold of you and not go away. And all of these things, all of it is spiritual. Everything is spiritual, so it all has to do with vibrational frequency. If you can raise your vibration, you can literally heal yourself. by doing that. And there's a bunch of science to that too. Once again, we're dealing with alchemy, we're dealing with metaphysics. So there's a whole lot of science to that. Some of it I talk about in the book. Some of it actually, is beyond me too, because I'm not really necessarily a chemist in terms of in terms of that. There's some people that focus on just that level of it, because it's so deep that you can go. You can go literally to the point where you can understand this on an astrophysical and a chemical level as well. But still, just to even talk about it in basic terms, and I do go into some depth when I do the book, as I'm writing the book. But just to basically summarize it, this is all about vibrational frequency. When you vibrate low, you get sick, you can't think straight, you can't focus. All the disorders and diseases you ever heard of, all are the result of it. You get all of that stuff starts to happen. You start getting these psychological illnesses. So that's vibration. But when you are able to get your atoms and your entire physical makeup to vibrate at a higher frequency and to vibrate faster, then you literally are transmuting. You literally are transforming. You're literally becoming an entirely different being. And as you do this, as your vibration raises, what would happen is that you would find yourself in an entirely different universe. And what that means is that you would be capable of being here with the rest of us normal humans, but you would also be in another place at the same time. And you could choose to dwell only in this other place, in which case to us you probably would simply dematerialize, and you would be in this other world. And in this other world, who knows what's there? Nothing that's here is there, I can tell you that much. It's entirely, it's something that in our terms we can never describe it, and we will never experience it in our terms, because it is not of our terms, it's of the next paradigm, the vibration above ours. But this is where we get into parallel dimensions. Of course, each vibrational frequency has multiple dimensions within it that are not even necessarily vibrational. It just has to do with different organizations of energy, and energy expressing itself in different ways within that vibrational frequency. And then you have the other vibrations. But all of this stuff is described in the book. The thing is that this is some crucial stuff, because this is going to happen. I mean, it is happening. And we're going to go through this transition, and we're going to start seeing some next level stuff, and feeling, and sensing, and smelling, and having these visions. And and a lot of people are already experiencing these things, and they think it's it's either haphazard, or they think it's just strange, and they don't know what's going on. They're like, oh, well, I don't know, my psychic awareness has been heightening in the past few years. I don't know why. So those kinds of things have been going on. Some people have been experiencing that. But really, that is an effect of the what we call the quickening. And the quickening is basically, it means that our vibrational frequency is changing, and in fact, we are beginning to vibrate faster than we did before. And as our atoms vibrate faster than they did before, that transmutational process is beginning. And what will happen is that this transition will be a transition from the normal low state of vibrational frequency, which is where we've been for the past 2,000 years, and it will transition into a slightly higher rate. And now the difference will be minute in terms of the atom's vibrational rate itself, but the difference in our physical makeup, our spiritual ability, our cosmic understanding, and our society will be the equivalent of an apocalypse. It will be a literal, profound changeover where old management is kicked out by the universe itself. Old rulers are going to start losing, their riches. Enterprises are going to fall. All this kind of stuff's going to happen. And an entirely new set of rulership, of a new way of thinking, a new type of government, new type of society is going to start to emerge out of the dust of the destroyed old one. And all this stuff is happening. It may happen subtly for a while, but the ancients said that there would be chaos. So apparently, at some point, it will be. It may be subtle now as we're moving into the beginning of the transition, but once the transition happens, it probably will be like an apocalypse. It probably will be chaos, because it has to be, right? How can you dethrone old rulers who never had any intention of being overthrown because they didn't understand how the cosmos works? They didn't understand that vibrational frequency cannot be held back. It cannot be stopped. And even it cannot be delayed, really. You can delay it for a little while. You can play a bunch of head games and create a bunch of technologies and a way of living that can stunt people's growth for a while. But sooner or later, their vibrational frequency will raise. You can't stop it because the cosmos dictates it. There's science behind that too. I mean, once again, that's why I'm trying to write this book, because I can't talk about right now. I'm winging it, just talking off the top of my head. But a lot of this stuff needs to be put into chapters and categories and talked about a little bit more in depth, at least from as much information as I have in my own lifetime and my own experiences. And hopefully, it can be a guide to all those who need it, and perhaps a tool for all those who don't need it, for them to guide others. Not so much a big deal, just really me doing my part, as we all should be doing, and many of us are. And many of us are doing our part. So this would just be my contribution to it. But there's so much that has to be understood, and has to be understood quickly. We're sitting around worried about a lot of things that really don't matter. We're worried about all these superficial, physical, societal status quo, just stupidness. Stuff that couldn't possibly matter. In a million years it wouldn't matter. And all of that kind of thinking has to stop. And it's got to stop immediately. It has to stop yesterday, in fact. Because that thinking makes you, it'll make you be caught unaware. Transition will sneak up behind you. The next thing you know, there's going to be half animal, half human demons running around. It's going to be laser guns flying through the laser blasts flying through the air, and spaceships are going to be entering the atmosphere and shooting energy blasts, and the ground's going to be exploding, and you're going to have these super soldiers going to be running around trying to fight it off. And probably super soldiers, probably made by our own government. Us thinking they didn't have the technology. They been had the technology since the 1930s. To make these kinds of things. They'll be fighting off all kinds of inhuman stuff, and then then there'll probably be some kind of messiahs somewhere trying to preach about the vibrational ascension and the quickening. And who knows what else will be going on. This kind of stuff is just gonna take certain people by surprise. But if that can be lessened, if those people can be prepared and warned and given the kind of tools they need to start to raise their vibrational frequency, even if they're not going to get deep with it. And not everyone has to get deep, because it's not about getting deep. It's just about making an effort to ascend in some way or to evolve in some way. For some people, that evolution might simply be a change of values. Or it might simply be a reevaluation of how they live their life, or how they've treated people that have been close to them, or what type of reputation they've made for themselves. All of these things matter, and all these things factor into our God consciousness and the achievement of higher consciousness. How we live. The life itself actually is a cosmic experience, because everything that is physical is a representation of, or a counterpart to, or plays some type of role in the spiritual circumstances and societies and systems of the universe ahead of ours, which is the one that we're transitioning into. So everything that we experience in a physical lifestyle, we may think it's mundane and and straightforward and average everyday stuff, but in fact, it is of cosmic significance. So everyone evolves in their own way, at their own pace, but those who gain any kind of distance in terms of their enlightenment, their ascension, those who get above where most people are, who get into that 1%, or at least the 2% of the population, which would be people who have some awareness but don't fully get it. And then the 1% would be, those who know what's going on and are literally preparing for it. But, um, everyone has to be prepared, though. The idea is not to necessarily leave anyone behind, but it's to make an attempt, a subtle attempt to give everyone options, because that's what it's ultimately about, are options. That sometimes a person, no matter how shallow or how ignorant, how dead, and how blind and how ignorant they are, sometimes if they're given an option to be more, an option to understand more, to know themselves better, sometimes they'll choose it. And so sometimes the actual problem is a lack of options, and not so much that everyone is just so complacent, even though most people are so complacent. But not everyone is that way. Some people who we think are complacent are simply cut off from anything that would provide them with an alternative to how to do things. So that's what it's really about, It's what can each person who believes that they have some knowledge, what can you do to help the next person who you believe does not have some knowledge to, maybe to help themselves a little bit, or to improve upon themselves, or to, get to the next level, or sometimes not even that, maybe even to just question. Sometimes all it takes is a question. All it takes is the question of, is this really what this seems like it is? Like, am I really what I think I am? Is this world really what it looks like? Is this world really real? Am I really in it? Am I real? So sometimes it just comes down to just a simple question. Most people are so tangled up in the video game, which is what I call it, because that's what it is. This whole entire reality is essentially a cosmic video game, very well developed, very well designed, but a video game nonetheless, and it operates very much like a computer system. It has rules, it has laws, but if you look carefully enough, you can see the glitches. And so some people are so tangled up in the video game that they never question anything. To them, it's all matter-of-factly, and it's all real, and it's all at face value, whatever they see it as being. And that's because they get tangled up. Some people, it's not because of being tangled up. Some people literally don't have the level of consciousness required to see or understand or even perceive anything beyond what is on the vibrational frequency that they're on. And that's because they're vibrating at that frequency and they're locked down. Which was, of course, the plan of those who knew what they were doing when they were locking their people down. There's once again, even that in the book goes into that. But for some people, it's that. But for other people, it's that they just really got that caught up that it just never occurred to them that there could be anything beyond what they've already seen, heard, and experienced. And sometimes when you expose people to things, it creates a question. They may not understand you at first. They may not even listen to you at first, or they may even, buck, and say, "Oh no, I don't think that's, I don't believe, I don't believe it," or whatever. But sometimes, just by that exposure to whatever you're talking about, afterwards, they have a moment of doubt, and that moment of doubt, that question, that moment of questioning, or that moment of saying, "Well, dang, what if?" Whatever. And sometimes that moment is the moment that wakes them up. It's kind of like if you were in a dream. Not to say that this is a dream. This is a little bit more. It's a little bit more complicated than that. In some ways, it is very similar to a dream, though. But I don't want to say that it's a dream. But just like in a dream, though, to use as an example, you're in a dream and everything's fine, and then something happens in the dream. And consciously, you say to yourself, I think I must be dreaming because something about that was off. Or I must be dreaming because in real life, if this were real life, by my conception of what a real life would be, I don't think that would have happened. So you have these moments when you're dreaming and it feels real, and you think you're awake, and you think you're just chilling, doing whatever you're doing. But then something happens, and you question it. You're like, wait, I don't know. I might be dreaming right now. I might actually be asleep. You know. Or sometimes it's like, oh snap, I'm asleep. You know, and you realize it. You know, and sometimes that's right when you wake up, or other times you can actually not wake up, stay in the dream, but now you're in the dream aware that you're dreaming, and you're kind of enjoying it more, and you have a lot more power over what happens because you realize that you're in your own dream and that it's not real and it's really coming out of your own subconscious. And so, in that sense, yeah, this reality is very much like a dream. And sometimes if you can just get people to question, to wake up just enough for that one moment to say, dang, what if I'm dreaming? Or dang, what if this isn't what I thought it was? What if things aren't quite as they seem? That's all it takes. So I want to do my part in helping that to happen, helping people to do that. And yeah, what else can you do? All you can do is put information out there. Some people will bite, some people won't. It doesn't matter. But those who will and who want it and who feel like they need it or are searching for it, they'll get it. They'll find it. So that's what the book is going to be about, and it will be coming out soon. You just have to look out for it. You'll know because I'll be promoting it through this YouTube channel, and I'll be putting a link down there too, because I'll be crowdfunding to help with producing, publishing, and writing and getting the cover art and stuff for the book done. And yeah, pretty much, that's what it's going to be about. So when the book comes out, the information that's going to be in it, some of the things that we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about, well, first of all, we're going to talk about the different elements of the self, because we have to talk about that. We've got to understand. Everyone's talking and trying to ask these different questions about, who are you? What are you? What's the difference between the who and the what? Because even that's fundamental. That there is a difference between who and what. One of those things is absolute, is a fact. It is truth. It is cosmically true, and it is true throughout all the realms and universes of the cosmos. The other thing is entirely superficial and does not exist at all. It's simply a perception created by the self. So even understanding that, the difference between who and what, saying, okay, well, someone could ask you, who are you? But then they could also ask you, what are you? And they may know what you are, but not know who you are. Need to get to know you in order to know who you are, but they may know what you are. So that's the first thing. And then after that, too, the book, we have to go into the different elements of the self. So in other words, there are different spiritual, well, not even spiritual. Once again, the word spiritual is not quite as accurate as I would like it to be, even though that's the word everyone uses. But it's not really all that accurate, because there are different selves. Not so much that they're spiritual, they are non-corporeal, and only one of them is physical in the sense that we understand physicality. However, there are multiple selves that exist on different planes of the universe, different planes of the dimensional, multiverse, if you will. So that has to be discussed. We need to go over that. And the information I have on that comes both from my own meditation experiences, in which I ask questions and have been given answers at different times. And it's also based on my own research of a lot of different ancient mythologies, alchemy, metaphysics, and then of course my research based in modern day, in terms of different lecturers and books and things that I've read and listened to. So I put all that information together, and I create, in myself, I've created different knowledge and different theories based on all this information. Some of it I'm strongly convinced actually is fact, and some of it, which in the book I will tell the difference between, some of it actually is more of a detailed, educated theory. But I'll give both, and I'll be talking about the difference between the two, and which part of it that we can say is most likely true, and which part of it we can say, well, there could be variations to this. This is maybe true, or it could be this way, and it could also be slightly another way, or it could be this way, or it could not necessarily be this way. But this could be a conceptual way of understanding something. So we'll talk about the different aspects of the book. I'll be giving some facts, and I'll be giving some things that come directly from my own meditation, my own communication with both higher and lower beings, and all the other beings that I've had communication with. And so when you speak to these other beings, sometimes they do tell you the truth, but sometimes they lie. So there are beings that do lie. Those are the lower beings. And then on the other hand too, you have beings that are not lying. They try to convey things to you, sometimes in forms of communication that can't be understood physically. For instance, I've had beings speak to me in both meditation and dreams. Well, meditation, dreams, and visions. I've had beings speak to me before, and speak to me in using a language made of sounds that could not be reproduced using human vocal cords. So needless to say, whatever I gathered from what I could sense, or what was telepathically understood, is most likely not entirely what they were trying to communicate to me. So I have, there's information that's like that too. So anyway, so we explore all of this kind of stuff, in the book. But yeah, we have to talk about the different elements of the self. Got to talk about that. That's crucial to talk about the different levels of the self that exist throughout the cosmos. To talk about the echoing of self throughout all the planes and all the levels of actuality in the universe. We've got to talk about that. We have to talk about the different layers and levels of just the physical, mundane self. So we talk about that. We talk about how the different selves relate. Relationship between the different selves that you are. So that's one thing that the book has to go into. We definitely go into that. We also go into heavily, because the book, a lot of it is focusing on the importance of this. Is we heavily and in much detail go into the importance of the pineal gland. And we have to go into the importance of the pineal gland because every being on earth has a pineal gland, and the pineal gland is in fact the key to vibrational ascension. If you didn't have a pineal gland, it wouldn't be possible. Now, of course, having one doesn't mean that it is possible, but we go into the fact that at least on the human level, for humans, the reason I say this is because obviously animals have one, but an animal is a different spiritual being and is not what a human is, and so the potential is different as well. But in terms of humans, on the human level, yeah, the pineal gland is the key to essentially to godhood. It's the key to the vibrational ascension, and when we talk about that, we're talking about godhood. And we talk about the importance of the pineal gland, the functions of it, what does it really do? And then we talk about melanin, and we have to talk about melanin because the pineal gland, produces these different chemical elements that are associated with melanin, and it produces the melanin, and it also regulates the melanin and distributes it throughout your body to your organs and to different places where the melanin goes, to your brain, and so on and so forth. And so we have to talk about the pineal gland's significance, and we have to talk about melanin, which the ancients, our ancestors, called it the God particle. And we have to understand why it's the God particle. What does it do? And once again, in this book, I'm trying not to, I'm not getting too technical on the chemistry stuff, because my stuff is not really so much, the chemistry aspect of it. That's something that, there are some other lecturers and writers who I know, go there with it and go on that level with it. But a lot of times you don't know what the heck they're talking about. So we're not going to necessarily go into the techniques of different, chemistry and stuff that nobody understands. But a chemist, instead, we're going to talk about it a little bit more straightforwardly, and we're going to talk, a little bit more on the surface. We're going to use ancient stuff that a lot of our ancestors were studying alchemy and studying metaphysics, a lot of the things that they literally, wrote down to be remembered for later generations. We're going to talk about some of those findings, some of those teachings, and we'll talk about what some of modern metaphysicists have discovered, about melanin and about the pineal gland. So we'll go into all those different elements. And then we'll also talk about what I've been told by the beings I've had communication with when I've asked questions about what this whole thing is. And this whole thing really has to do with the eye. It's really about the eye. And then when we say the eye, we're talking about the pineal gland because it is the eye. In fact, it is the first eye, even though we have to call it the third eye because that's what everybody, calls it and understands it to be. But really, it's the first eye because it's the eye that predates all other eyes. It's the only eye, in fact. Physical eyes, that's actually an adaptation to the physical world. But before that, there was always the eye. Even in the spiritual, it was the eye. It wasn't a pineal gland, obviously, because that's a physical representation of the eye, whereas in the spiritual, it was a spiritual eye. But either way, the eye is what we're dealing with, and the eye is what produces the melanin. And so we have to definitely talk about the melanin, we have to talk about the pineal gland, we have to talk about this concept of the eye, and we have to talk about what I was told once by a very loud, powerful, echoey voice that spoke to me that I literally heard in my awakened meditation. In other words, I wasn't asleep, I was awake and meditating. And I asked a question and it answered me. And it told me something that's really interesting, really deep. And it had to do with the eye and the power of it and how God created the human from the eye, from the melanin of the eye. So we have to get into this melanin thing, we have to get into the pineal gland. So we talk about that, of course. And we have to go into depth about that. Then we talk about creation. And this is where it becomes both a theory and some things that I've received in my own spiritual communications with other beings, and then some things that I've learned from other metaphysicists and some things I've learned from other books, and so all that's going to come together, and we're going to discuss and talk about creation. We're going to talk about the 4 universes and the 4 universal suns and the significance of this, and also too the 4 universes plus. Remember I said some people say 5. You can say 5 if you want. It's really 4, but the first one is the one that is sometimes called the 5th. And the first one, really, for me, I consider it the 0th one, because it's not one, it is the one, it is the beginning of everything. And it is a realm. It is, supposedly they say that's where the mother creator, the original, and, the prime source actually resides. And this is the home of all beings that are a being. But then, after that, we have 4 universes, and we have 4 universal suns. We'll talk about all that, the beginning of the creation, and how, all this thing came together. We're going to draw heavily from Gnosticism for a lot of this stuff, from the different, Gnostic texts, and I'll be giving references also throughout the book about different places you can find similar information that will lead you to, probably lead you to some similar conclusions. So we go into this thing about the original creation, the original creator, the Christ or Christos, God-man, which is another being entirely that we have to understand, because this is really all about this particular being. This is what this whole cosmic drama really has to do with, is the Messiah. Because the Messiah here is also the Messiah in the spiritual realm. There was literally a spiritual Messiah who was different than all the beings before him. And so we have to understand that and understand where this whole thing about, Christ comes from. It's a much older tale than just the Christ in a religious sense. But it's actually talking about a concept, a conceptual Christ, which has existed in every realm before this and exists in this realm as well. So we have to get into that. So, we talk about the creation. We talk about the different types of beings that exist throughout the cosmos. Some of this, once again, will be fact in the book, and some of it will be theory in the book as well, and it will be designated which is what. But we have to talk about the different types of beings that exist, and the different types of beings that basically there's a potential for existing. We base this on the different universal laws that we have. We base this on the beings we know have existed in the past, that the ancients and our ancestors talked about and told us existed and told us the nature of these certain beings. We talk about those beings. We talk about the beings that people have visited, that have been visited, that people have seen or experienced in visions or in dreams and things like that. So we talk, all that kind of stuff is going to be in the book too, because you have to talk about that stuff. So the book, is going to go through all these different things. It's going to talk about chakras. Obviously, you got to talk about chakras. You have to talk about how there's more chakras than most people give credit to. Everyone talks about 7, but there's more than 7 chakras. I mean, in fact, to be honest, this is me giving a little bit of information out of the book. I will have probably put 1/3 of the book I would have put in this recording, but before I'm finished. But still, the book goes in way more detail than anything I can say right now. But to be honest, every joint in the body, every bending point in the body is actually a chakra as well, or at least almost every bending point. But pretty much that's the case, and we have to understand, well, what's that for? But see, the body is a physical replica of the layers of the spiritual self that exist in the spiritual realm, where the self is literally made up of spirit and not made up of physical matter. And so you have to understand that each chakra has a function and has a purpose, and it does something in reference to the system that it is a part of. And so when you spin your wrist, you spin your wrist and you think, well, what does your wrist connect? Well, it connects an appendage which extends out from you, and it connects a device which you use to grip, to hold things, to make contact with other things in your realm that are made up of the same material you're made up of. So I want to pick up the remote. The remote is a physical thing, so it exists in my physical realm. It's made up of the same atoms I'm made up of, even though it has a different order, a different construction, but it's made up of the same material matter, which are the same material atoms. And I want to pick it up with my hand. And the only thing connecting my hand to this appendage, which extends from my being, which is my arm, is my wrist. And so we have to understand that when you pick up the remote, and this may sound ridiculous, but when you pick up the remote, or when you pick up anything, we're using remote as an example, when you pick that up, when you reach out to grip this remote and you pick up this remote and then you operate this remote, you are performing a spiritual cosmic deed. And that's crazy. Which sounds crazy. It sounds crazy because, we look at everything in the physical as being just physical. We don't, because, it's difficult to understand how something operates on a level much higher than the one that you're on. But if you can understand that the one that you're on is in every way a rendition of the relationships and dynamics of the one that is spiritual, the one that you're not on, then you understand that everything that you are is a representative of what you are there, and it's in the spiritual realm or in the other realm. Everything that you can do is a representation of what you can do there. So here, you can walk and travel from one place to another by walking. So now you have to understand that if you can do that physically, that means that in the spiritual, there's something you can do with your spiritual self, which would cause travel from one level of consciousness or from one time to another. Because remember, apply the physical to the spiritual. If you're in the spiritual, you're not going to be traveling across a street, obviously. It's not even going to be a street. It's not, none of that's going to be there. So in the spiritual, if you're traveling, then what you're traveling through, if here you might be across the street, that's how the physical can interpret this. But in the spiritual, imagine what you'd be traveling through. You could be traveling through time. You could be traveling to different aspects of the universe, to different universes even. And, you could be traveling to different selves, from one self to another self, or from a higher self to a lower self. But there's something within your being that would allow you to easily travel in the same way that you walk across the street in the spiritual body. So just like that, we understand the chakras. The chakras do here what they do there, essentially, in a manner of speaking. So if you're able to pick up something and you have this thing at the that extends from you, and it's this arm, and then you have this elbow. And what does the elbow do? It allows the arm to change direction. It allows the arm to bend, in a sense, to shape itself to the edges or the environment in such a way that you can more easily grip whatever you're trying to grip. And then when you grip it, what are you gripping with? Well, it's a hand here, but what is it in the spiritual? And what's connecting what grips to what extends. So obviously what grips and what extends are two different energies, or two different spiritual constructions. What connects these two things is the wrist. And the wrist now becomes a center, it becomes a unifying principle between that which grips and that which extends out from the self. So we have to understand this. You see, so it's much deeper than, you know. So when you reach out and you grab your remote, that's a daggone spiritual event. You're using a spiritual power by doing that. And you're also learning about how your spiritual self lives in its life, in its everyday life, and what it's capable of doing. So imagine that because of gripping a remote to turn on your television in the physical, when you ascend to the spiritual, you will know how to do whatever the equivalent of that is, simply because you remember the dynamic of how you did it in the physical, and you apply one to the other. So you may not need to learn as much when you get to the spiritual because you learned some of it here. So that's why the physical is a counterpart to the spiritual. It is the representation of the spiritual. It is that, so that when you're learning about physical elements, about physical things, physical constructions of things, atoms and particles, and all, when you're learning about all these kinds of things, when you're doing something as dumb as walking across the street, or something as silly as picking up the remote to turn on the television, which you thought was because of laziness, and yeah, it probably was. But when you're doing something that's small, you're learning about how spiritual energies that are part of you, and how spiritual energies that you can interact with. You're learning about how those relationships operate in the spiritual, in the next universe, in the next realm. So, obviously, the book has to talk about that. It's got to talk about that. So we have to go into that. We go into the chakras. We go into all these different things. We go into, and which really I kind of already talked about. We go in depth into how the physical is a counterpart to the spiritual. We go into depth, and in the book, I'll explain it in a way that hopefully will make more sense in terms of how one thing can indirectly represent what another does. And so we talk about how the physical is that. The physical is like a play, like a stage play, or even, once again, we can say video game. That's the term I always use, or the analogy I always use, that it is like a video game. But what does a video game really do? A video game, we look at it like, oh, it's just a video game. But yeah, it's a video game. You play it and it's fun. But beyond that, when the video game, your game characters, what do they look like? Do they look like unintelligible creatures and you have no idea what the heck it is? I mean, yeah, some games you play creatures, but still, even in that, the creatures are generally humanoid. Your game characters are generally humanoid, aren't they? They usually look pretty much like humans. The game worlds are set up as a replica of the physical world. Even if the game world is a fantasy place, it still has a ground. It has a sky with either one or multiple suns in it, but it's got suns in the sky. It's got clouds, Probably got air. It's probably got climate conditions, weather. It's probably got day and night. You could be playing a video game, about some kind of spaceship and, situation out in space, or you could be playing a video game about, your Lord of the Rings games or your Star Wars video game or whatever kind of video game it is. But yet, on whatever the planet you're on, or in whatever fantasy world you're in, once again, the world in the video game is designed as a replica of the real world we actually live in. Even if it's not a direct replica, it's still a replica. Because, once again, you still got the climate and, and all that kind of stuff. You still have a humanoid character. You still have a character who can die, I mean, in what video game is your character immortal from the start of the game? Never. It might be a code you can put in, or it might be, a cheat or something you can achieve if you beat the game a couple of times. But the character's not going to start out immortal, because in the physical world that we're making the game based on, nobody is living forever. So, since that's the case, in the video game, your character's not going to live forever. He's going to die. I mean, he dies, whatever happens, happens. Either you got to go back to the checkpoint, or you got to start over again, whatever it is. But he's going to die in that game, because the game's a replica of the lifestyle that we're living, and the lifestyle we're living, we die in. So you have to look at that. Look at how a video game is a replica of every law and every dynamic that applies to the physical world. And you have to look at that and realize that that's what the physical world is to the spiritual world. It is a replica, sometimes indirect, but still a replica of everything, every law, every dynamic that works and operates on a regular basis in the spiritual realm. Now, in real life, it may be more indirect. The reason why is because the physical plane has been downgraded. But that's another thing we'll talk about in the book. We'll talk about the original humanoid versus the humanoid that we are now, which is not the original humanoid. Once we return to the original humanoid state, we probably would say we were God and we hadn't even begun the ascension yet. And the reason why is because the original humanoid is so marginally superior to the human that we've become now that it would probably be godlike in comparison to what we are. But that's not the ascension. That's just the normal way we were supposed to be. So once we get back to that, and then from that, we're actually going to go above it. We're going to go to that and then ahead of it in record time. But so the book, we talk about that, the original humanoid, and we talk about how this original humanoid is spoken of in Greek mythology, spoken of in Kemetic mythology, in Sumerian mythology. It's talked about. It's talked about all over the place. The information's everywhere. Just that we're not reading, we're not paying attention. So we talk about that in the book. We talk about the original humanoid. We talk about the original state of Earth and how that's mostly theorized by scientists and metaphysicists, and spiritualists. I mean, I think everyone has a theory about what the original Earth was like, but generally we all agree on a lot of things. What we do know is that the original state of the planet Earth is not the state we're living in now. This is not the way Earth was supposed to be. This is a bastardization of the original Earth. The original Earth was more likened to what you consider the Garden of Eden. It was a much more balanced and much more perfect place. Not literally perfect, but it was a much more balanced place where there was equilibrium. So we talk about that in the book too. We talk about all these different things having to do with the original state of things. Of course, in the book we have to also talk about the enemy. We talk about the enemy because you have to know who your enemies are. You should never pay too much time or attention thinking to your enemy, or spend too much time thinking about your enemy. But it's also good to know that there is an enemy, and really there's two enemies, depending on how you want to look at it. I look at it like there's one enemy because the enemy that is within is not really an enemy, but it's perceived as an enemy because we fight with it, even though it's an aspect of our own selves, but we still fight with it. And the enemy that's external to us is in a way also within us too. In a way is once again kind of yourself. So really there is one enemy, but in the physical, once again, it can become confusing where it appears to be an external enemy and an inner enemy. And there's a reason for that, but we go into all that too about this enemy, because there is an enemy, regardless of how many enemies you want to say it is. There's definitely an enemy, and we're definitely at war with this enemy, and all the minions and all the associates of this enemy, because there are many. In fact, there's an entire confederation, supposedly, all devoted to the ways of this particular enemy faction. They all work together and they all have their own, laws, and they have their own technology, and they're using it, in very horrible and, distracting ways to keep us limited. So, the book, we talk about that. We go into a lot of depth about the enemy. We talk about the doppelganger, which is the enemy of the self, the self enemy, the universal war that occurs within each individual, because we have to understand that the human is the Messiah being in the physical, and Messiah being what that really is a fusion of all things existing as one thing. That's what the Christ is. The Christ is true balance, true equilibrium between every personality of the Creator, every energy, every power, every zodiacal force, every dominion, every color of light, because we have to get into that too, light and different colors of light, and how there are different vibrations of light, and what different vibrations are, all that stuff, all that's in the book too. But the different vibrations of light, different colors of the rainbow, if you want to call it that. Anything that is, and that is part of the Creator, that is a separate part of it, all of those things are fused Dragon Ball Z style, into one being, and this being is the Messiah. This being is the Christ. Not that is only one. No, it is the Christ. It is a concept of a being, and this being exists on every level of the universe, and we are it. We're it on the physical. Or at least we are, but we need to transmute back into. Well, I can't say back either because we go into why I can't say we go into that in the book too, but we need to transmute into the true state of being this particular being in the physical, because we're not quite there yet. But obviously, that's what the transition is about, moving towards that. But this Messiah being is also a being who will suffer greatly. And by now you should be thinking about the story of Christ in the Bible. You should be thinking about that, because you'll notice that there are a lot of parallels. There are a lot of things about the story of Christ that is conceptual to this particular dynamic. And so basically, the Christ being will suffer greatly, just as the Christ in the Bible suffered greatly. And the suffering is metaphorical and literal at the same time. It's metaphorical because all of those who are the descendants of the Christ, who are therefore the Christ as well, all of those descendants will suffer. Just as the Christ did. The Christ, in all of his renditions and all of his lineage, bloodlines, and all that he is, which is all his descendants and everything that is literally a direct representation of him, all of the Christ beings throughout all the universes will go through the greatest hardship of any being ever. Will literally be condemned to unfathomable suffering. And the suffering, in our case, is everything that we're going through right now. The entire human existence on this low vibrational level is this suffering. But anyway, all that stuff, all that stuff's in the book too. It's actually more in the book than I can remember right now. I mean, obviously I haven't, there's an outline and stuff, but I'm not looking at the outline right now, and I can't put it all in this recording anyway. But suffice it to say, the book goes into all of this stuff, all the different levels of this whole thing, this whole cosmic situation, this whole cosmic drama, this whole, the multi-universes, the different aspects of the self, godhood, what godhood really means when people say it, the different terms that I'll use, all of them are defined in the book. Different terms you might hear are defined in the book, and what they mean, what they don't mean. The difference between ascension and descension, the difference between between what people are calling these light beings, these light workers, whatever kind of different terms they're using for these. These are some of the terms they use. Understanding what that's really about, and that it's really something to stay away from, and not to deal with at all in any way, shape, or form. We go into the true meaning and understanding of darkness, and we're talking about dark matter and melanin and chaos chemical and and the chaos particle and the God particle and all these different names and things referring to this darkness thing. But there's so many different there's different types of darkness, and there's different things meant by it and all that stuff has to be defined and refined, so that people who are trying to get into this information for the first time, or who are just getting into it, can understand and get the kind of find the kind of conclusions and answers that they're looking for within themselves. So all this kind of stuff is defined, and I explain all of it, and we talk about different things in the book. So yeah, I could sit here and talk more and more about what needs to happen, what is happening, and what I'm how I'm doing, trying to do my part to help out, and what's going to be in this book that I have coming up. So I can keep talking about it, but essentially, enough is enough. Hopefully, you get the point by now. If you don't, look out for the book. Like I said, subscribe to this YouTube channel, and follow me. The book is it's going to be coming out. It's going to take a little while. I'm still working on it. There's still some chapters and things that I have to write. But I'm going to be crowdfunding a little bit for it coming up soon. I'll be putting the links, for that through here. I'll be telling you the websites and all that kind of stuff. It'll be through here, through YouTube. And other than that, if you want to reach out, contact me for any reason, feel free to do it. I always look forward to making connections with people. So I would welcome any kind of communications and any kind of questions or statements. And yeah, I mean that's pretty much what it is at this point. The reason why I'm not saying the name of the book right now, too, just in case you're wondering, what the name of the book is going to be. I'm not saying the name of the book because I started on the book about a year and a half ago, and I was given a name for the book. See, none of this stuff can be haphazard. I mean, I even got my own name from spiritual means. So that's how I name everything. It comes from spiritual means. Either it's going to be I got the name in a dream, or it's going to be I meditated and asked what the name should be, and I was told. Something like that. I'm not just going to make up a name off the top of my head. I don't do that. I don't like to do that. So I was given a name for it when I first started it. But energies change, things change. It's a different year, and now the universe is telling me that there may be another name that I maybe need to give the book instead. So I'm not sure. I got to see what's going on. So I need to meditate on it a few more times, and I need to make sure that I'm giving it the correct name, the name that the universe wants me to give it. But even that will be explained in the book. We'll explain about that whole thing about energies, phases of energies, the zodiac, zodiacal energies and forces, and how they are conscious and they're aware and they're real beings, but they also have an influence on. They basically are similar to a film script, and we are playing out that film, and so they bear an influence on different human events and what is going to be, what is going to work out for us or not work out, and how it's going to turn out. So we talk about that in the book too. But yeah, I'll definitely be putting up another video, and I'll probably be explaining what the name of the book's going to be. Hopefully I should probably know for a fact pretty soon. There are 3 names floating around in my consciousness right now, and I need to meditate on them a few more times and see which one is supposed to be the name I need to use at this particular point in time for the book. But I'll do that. I'll be putting up another video. Actually, I'm going to be putting up videos consistently. So this is just it's good to check back here. Like I said, subscribe to this YouTube channel, and I'll have stuff consistently coming out. Even though I'm putting the book out, there's so much to talk about that I'll be putting videos up where I'm talking about other deep things that may not even be in the book, or I may give some of the information in the book and not all of it, and for lack of time. Obviously I can't be up here for like 5 and 7 hours, but yeah, just holler back at me, check me out. When I put the crowdfunding link and stuff up there, if you want to help out with some of the expenses, making the book and things like that, then that'll be great too. So you can use the links, and you'll be able to give some donations if you want to do that. And other than that, just keep checking back for the videos. I'll be talking about a lot of stuff, just talking, and I usually wing it. I usually just talk about whatever comes to mind, whatever comes through. That's what gets said. And I'll be doing that, so just holler at your boy and check me out, and that's what's up. Alright, talk to you guys later. Peace.